We're glad. I know. Sometimes it's been. I am going to call to order our subcommittee meeting for general government. Mr. Clerk, if you wouldn't mind calling the roll.
Chair Braybeck.
I am here.
Representatives Hood.
Present.
Fury.
Here.
O'Neill.
Present.
Steckloff.
Present.
Menzner.
Present.
Boland.
Here.
Leitner.
Here.
Kuhn.
Here.
Chair, all members present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I appreciate it. Rep. Kuhn moves to approve the minutes from the previous meeting without objection. The minutes are approved. Thank you, Rep. Today, we're continuing to make our way through our general government budget. And today, we have the Secretary of State here, the Department of State, and we have our Deputy Secretary of State, Agogo Devier, is here with us. And so I would love for you to come on up. And folks, you have the presentation in front of you, but it's also on the screen, so you have it in both places to be able to review. I would just ask you to take it away. Thanks for being here.
It is our pleasure. So my name is Agogo Devier. I am the Deputy Secretary of State, and I'm joined with Cindy Paradine, our Director of Financial Services. So we have a presentation for you, and she's going to take us through it, and then afterwards I'll talk a little bit about our driver's ed proposal and answer any questions that you may have.
That sounds great. Cindy, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't introduce you to.
Oh, no, you're fine.
But we're super happy you're here.
You're fine. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Cindy Paradine. I'm the Financial Services Director for the Michigan Department of State. I've been working for the Department of State for 24 years, and I've been the Financial Services Director for the last 14. The role of the Michigan Department of State is to provide driver, vehicle, and democracy services, which includes driver licensing, vehicle registrations, regulatory and consumer protection, driver education and testing, uniform commercial code, organ donation promotion, elections, campaign finance, lobby registration, Office of the Great Seal. We also collect a significant amount of money for the state. MDOS collected $3.6 billion for the state of Michigan during FY23. This was a 2.5% increase compared to FY22. The next slide contains a breakdown of how the funds we collected were distributed by agency. MDOS distributes revenue to 13 other state agencies. Of the $3.6 billion MDOS collected in FY23, $2.7 billion was for roads and education. $587.5 million was collected for the general fund, $209 million for MDOS, $47.7 million for natural resources, and $30 million for state police, followed by several smaller amounts for agencies that I will not go over in detail. In FY23, MDOS spent $254 million compared to the total revenue collections of almost $3.6 billion. The ratio of revenue to expenditures is 7.1%. This means that for every dollar collected, only 7.1 cents were needed to fund MDOS operations. The FY25 governor's recommended budget for MDOS is $291,839,900. This is a decrease of $12,369,600 compared to the current FY24 appropriation due to the removal of current year one-time funding. The largest increase is $5.3 million to allow us to fill some vacant positions that we did not have the funding to fill previously. There is also a total of $9.6 million for current services baseline increases. In the next slides, we will talk about each of the increases in more detail. The only investment in our recommended budget is $5.3 million in restricted revenue authorization to fill 41 vacant positions across 6 line items. We currently have approximately 80 appropriated unfunded FTE, since our fixed fee restricted revenue collections have not kept up with inflationary cost increases over the last 20 years. This has resulted in backlogs, audit findings, and some unhappy customers and employees. This investment does not increase the overall FTE included in the budget. Our current services baseline adjustments include $1.1 million for 10 FTE in elections. 8 of the FTE are for the new financial disclosure requirements in Public Acts 281 and 282 of 2023, and 2 FTE for the automatic voter registration changes in accordance with Public Acts 260 through 262 and 268 of 2023. $1.1 million from the TAC fund for license plate cost increases, $1.1 from the TAC fund for United States Postal Service and UPS rate increases, $650,000 from the TAC fund for tab, decal, and form contract cost increases, and $5.3 million for standard economic adjustments. Only $185,400 of this is from the general fund. As you can see from the chart, 57% of the funding for MDOS comes from the TAC fund. We would like to thank you for the $18.8 million in ongoing funding from the Election Support Fund for Proposal 2 and early voting costs. Other large restricted revenue sources include $27.9 from driver fees and $19.5 million from enhanced license fees. While the general fund makes up 4.6% of the total budget for MDOS, the $13.4 million represents only 0.09% of the total general fund budget statewide. 56.9% of the MDOS budget is spent on people, 13.4% is spent on IT. Other large spend categories within CSS&M, which stands for contractual services, supplies, and materials, are early voting costs for locals, $10 million, driver license and ID cards, $6.2 million, license plates, $4.5 million, and tabs, $1.5 million. The next page includes the FY24 supplementals that we have requested. $5.7 million in federal HAVA security grant authorization to support election security-related initiatives. $831,900 to cover partial year funding for the 8 FTE to implement the new financial disclosure requirements. $1.1 million for license plate cost increases. $110,400 for the general fund portion of the employee one-time lump sum payments, and $750,000 for special election costs, which was included in the Treasury budget. We also had 2 requests that were not included in the FY25 governor's recommended budget. As you may recall, the FY24 governor's recommended budget included a TAC fee sunset elimination with inflationary language to allow fee adjustments based on the Consumer Price Index. The inflationary language was removed in the final version of the budget, and the sunset was extended until October 1st, 2027. Except for the record lookup fee, no other TAC fees have been raised since the fund was created in 2004. This has resulted in our fees not covering costs due to inflation, allowing for future fee adjustments by $1 every couple of years, so the record lookup fee, registration service fee, and title service fee, along with a sunset elimination, would provide us with a long-term, stable, and reliable funding source to support our budget. We also requested $45 million in general fund to make driver's education affordable and accessible in Michigan. Driver's education in Michigan was privatized after the Driver's Education Fund was eliminated in 2004. Many families simply cannot afford the cost of driver's education classes and road testing. Some private providers in the state are charging as much as $650 for segment 1 of driver's ed. All of this is significantly impacting the state's young drivers. An analysis of our department's data showed that in the year 2000, 66% of Michigan's teens had driver's licenses. That number dropped to 56% in 2021. We believe that two options are needed to improve access for teens: providing grants to teenagers whose family can't afford to purchase driver's education courses out of pocket, and exploring a return of driver's education to our public schools. You should have received a 2-page document with additional information regarding this proposal for your further review and consideration. This completes our budget presentation. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Deputy Director, did you want to say anything else about the driver's license
Yeah, I just,
solution?
the driver's ed proposal, I think, is really critical. We know that in certain parts of the state, there aren't as many private providers available. And having that balance of being able to provide driver's ed through a public school or another type of educational facility is really crucial to ensure that Michigan drivers are safe on our roads. It's our number one priority to make sure that our roads are safe. The other piece that is really critical to think about is the equity piece. A lot of, as Cindy outlined, segment one for some students in the state costs $650 just for that segment one. That is a huge burden on Michigan families. So doing things like this budget proposal to help lower that burden and that cost on Michigan families, I think something that we should all embrace, regardless of partisanship. So that's the only piece I would add, but we're certainly committed to working with everyone on this panel to come up with a proposal that respects our fiscal situation, but also really embraces and helps Michigan families at this time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know that I am older than a lot of folks here, but I took driver's ed in school. And so when our kids are doing it, it's shocking to me. So, Rep. Hood?
Yeah, I'm about to pay for driver's ed, and I'm a little worried about the cost of session 2. Any any insight? I'll take that offline. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. In the past, Treasury has handled funds for election security and improvements for election security, and those funds are invested at MDOS, the Department of State, in order to implement those improvements. Can you talk a little bit more to this relationship and how that works, and then also to the election security investments that we've been able to make with some of the one-time funding that we saw last year, and what that looks like?
I'm gonna let Cindy handle this one.
Yeah, so Treasury funds the election support fund, so they basically transfer the revenue to MDOS, and MDOS has control of the funding at that point and works with the local units to reimburse them for their costs, or in some cases, we actually funded voting equipment, the electronic poll books for early voting. I think you were talking about that $30 million, which is different than the election security grant. So and Treasury's not involved with the election security grant. That's a federal grant that we receive directly from the federal government.
So there are HAVA funds which come directly from the federal government, which we help to get out to the locals, and locals can apply for reimbursement. And in addition, there is the $30 million that we are very grateful that the legislature appropriated last year. There was one cycle of grant funding that has taken place where local counties were able to apply for monies. And a lot of that went towards election equipment, specifically with HART, ES&S, and Dominion, the 3 vendors that we have for election machines in the state. So those funds were directly, for the most part, covered by the state, and other funds are going to be reimbursed directly to the locals. We're still determining how much is left over in that initial $30 million fund, and that will be used mostly for August, and then the $10 million that we're asking for the next fiscal year will be for November and any other additional elections that we might have in the remainder of that fiscal year. So it's certainly appreciated, and I know that the local clerks, it has really, I think, kind of lessened some of their fears, because we have a lot of things in this general election coming up with early voting, some of the other changes that have come through with Prop 2, but also just the environment that we're in. This is a very partisan and contentious election cycle, and so we want to make sure that we're administering elections in this state in a fair way, a responsible way, and a secure way. And so we're committed to using those funds in conjunction with our local clerks to get it done.
Thank you so much.
Minority Vice Chair Bolin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I have a couple of questions about the proposals that passed. One has to do with the campaign finance disclosures, and this week we have a deadline coming up. And so, what is the progress? Where are we at with that in the investment of state dollars to make sure we're compliant?
Yeah, so the deadline is coming up this week. We are certainly very aware of it. We are going to meet the deadline, and I don't want to get ahead of any announcements by the secretary. It's always good to know that she's the number one person on that team, and I'm the number two.
Okay, so yes,
Yeah,
by Thursday
we'll meet the deadline.
Be
Absolutely.
ready to notify people and.
Yeah, we will notify everyone, and we're also going to provide some training sessions for legislators like yourself or anyone else who's comes under the requirements of Proposal 1 of how they can submit their financial disclosures appropriately.
Great. So on the other side of it is a lot of the early voting implementation. And of course, we know we just went through this cycle where, we were kind of under two laws, if you will, leading up to the presidential primary, right? Having to be instituted. And what are we doing to make sure that we're better prepared? A lot of the stuff, the electronic poll books, it is a very unique election as a former clerk, right?
Mm-hmm.
The presidential primary happens once every 4 years. In fact, every election this year is a different type of election. And so what are we doing to make sure we're on course? I'm mostly concerned about making sure we have the proper education and tools for the clerks. And also our election inspectors to make sure they're properly trained, and that'll all kind of be going on and again for the cycle.
Yeah, well, I want to first speak to the funding aspect of it. Because of the funds that were appropriated by the legislature, and it's also important to remember that since 1988, the state of Michigan has guaranteed that all local costs associated with the presidential primary are reimbursed by the state. And that is a huge benefit to our local government, so that we never want that to change, and we actually want that to move forward for other elections, which we talked about last year, didn't really go anywhere, but I'm still on my soapbox about local election funding. But the early voting funding that we did get for that $30 million plus that funding from the presidential cycle is going to go a long way to ensuring that we have enough election inspectors who are fully paid and compensated for the great work that they do for our state. We're working really hard through the Bureau of Elections in our Train the Trainer series to ensure that clerks are properly trained so that they can go out and train their election inspectors. So that's on top of mind. Of course, we just had a couple of debrief sessions with clerks about the early vote cycle in the presidential primary to see what worked and what didn't work. So we're kind of getting that information, reviewing it, and then we'll make adjustments as necessary. But we are laser focused on making sure that early voting works in August and November, but also that we have all the security and procedures in place to have a well-administered election cycle this year.
Absolutely. I echo those. I'm a strong advocate for proper election funding, and what I would like to see is, and work with you in the efforts to make sure all of our local clerks get the resources they need. A lot of the money was targeted that the legislature appropriated this year. I think what I've seen, having debriefings and briefings before with the clerks that I've worked with for many years and in my district, is they were concerned about late rollout of some of the instructional manuals, and so it is training, but also the resources. Mm-hmm. But I hope that we can work to get more equitable funding across the state to the local clerks, because I think early voting is a great opportunity. You know, I am supportive of the early voting process, so, but we know it costs money.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just to the point in terms of the lateness, we, of course, went through the pilot last November with the local elections in some jurisdictions around the state, and we learned from it, and so we had to tweak some things with the early vote poll book. For the most part, I've been hearing from all our clerks around the state that I've been in touch with that they're really pleased with the early vote poll book and think that it works extremely well, and they want it to actually extend to Election Day because it's better, in their opinion, than the technology we use on Election Day. So, you know, this is a year where we're all going to ask for some grace because this is new for all of us, but we're really proud of what we were able to do in the presidential primary, especially in partnership with our clerks, who we are so proud of.
So on that, with the electronic poll book and the voter history, I hope that so we can get a long-term assessment of where the resources are needed and where we might have to tweak. Because I do think we rolled out a lot of new stuff, and I think we have an obligation to be looking at them and revisiting those that worked and where we can tweak and make it better. But are we going to continue to make sure that in the qualified voter file or on the voter history that we show early voters, Election Day voters, and AV voters? Because I do think that's a critical number for all of us to see how we progress in voter turnout.
I think the qualified voter file is, you know, the gold standard in the state, and we're really proud of it, and we continue to invest in it. One of the new tools, which you may be alluding to, is that if you have an absentee ballot, you can fill it out at home, take it to your early vote site, or on Election Day, which we're hoping for August, take it there and put it straight into the tabulator. And the poll book tool allows the poll worker to switch that ballot from a AV designation to an early vote or Election Day vote. And so that technology is really important to make that process seamless, both for the election inspector on the day at that polling location and also during the canvass and with the clerk.
Yeah, I do think it will make it much more efficient. We just need to make sure we're recording that absent voter ballot has been spoiled properly.
Well, it's being recorded. I mean, we can maybe talk offline about the process, but everything is being recorded. Everything, as you know, as a former clerk, the biggest thing that we want in terms of recording things and documenting things is so that after the election we can go back and duplicate everything if we need to figure out what steps were taken, and we're committed to that process.
Yep, me as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Rep. Leitner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to go back to the driver's training stuff. I actually am going through this with my kid right now, my youngest. So we've already done segment 1 and 2 and are doing the test on Sunday. So anyways, I'm actually curious about, you know, I got your one pager, but I'm just curious to learn more about how the program's going to be operated, how it's going to impact all the private driver's training providers right now, because like in your document you say there's 281 of them. So I'm just curious, have you had discussions with them and how it's going to impact the current situation, I guess?
Yeah, we have had some discussions with private providers. I think most of the private providers in the state do a really terrific job. They help train our student drivers to get on the road and do it safely. The biggest barrier that we're trying to address with this proposal is cost. It's just financially prohibitive for a lot of students and student drivers to get into the program and get their access to driver's ed so that they can be safe drivers. In terms of the programmatic details, that's something we're still working out. We've been having some great conversations with the secondary principals or association, which I met with last week. We've had some conversations with the MEA. We've had some conversations with districts that have driver's ed currently in the schools right now to kind of figure out what's the sweet spot. And of course, Wayne Westland has a pilot through the last fiscal year budget where they're working on implementing it in their district. But it's not, we don't want a one size fits all. I think that would be a very big mistake. This state is very unique and very diverse. You've got rural areas, you've got urban areas, you've got just all different types of people. So we want to be really flexible in our approach, and we're still studying the exact specifics.
Okay, so I guess kind of in concept then, when you're talking about starting this program, is it in your vision to make it free? Like, am I missing a point, like making it free for people by providing it in school, paying a stipend? Like, do you know what that part looks like? Because I know you say it's cost prohibited, which I know it is because it's $500 for segment 1 and 2, and then the test. It's in my area,
you're
anyways.
proof positive.
I don't know other areas, probably more expensive, but I know in Jackson County, I'm doing it. It's $495 total for segment 1, 2, and then the driving test itself.
Yeah.
So is there in between? Because like with the money you guys are asking, if I just did it based off my numbers, I mean, that's only 90,000 kids, and you're looking at trying to do 170,000. So
Yes.
I'm guessing there's a cost share.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing up that distinction. So we are trying to do twofold things. One, for school districts, we would want every kid in the school district to have that funding. For the grant option, the direct funding to a student driver, we would want to cover the complete costs for those who qualify under an income threshold. So if your parent or your family income is below a certain level, we would give you that grant. If you're above, then we would hope and assume that you'd be able to cover that cost on your own. But certainly the intent is to ensure that anyone who's in the program is fully taken care of financially. But we're certainly willing to take more money if we want to help us cover every student in this state.
Well, the reason I ask about it, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, is because, I'm thinking in long term, then, you guys place people under your department, you want additional FTEs, then those people are going to be subject to collective bargaining or some part of a union, and costs are just going to go up every single year for these people because we're going to have government employees doing this when the private sector can continue to do it for a reasonable amount of money. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that, I think our union employees in the department are really good, and I think they deserve their pay, and we are happy to collectively bargain with them and to give them what they deserve. So it's not, I hear you, and we certainly are, our private providers do great work too, but we're not afraid of the collective bargaining process. We embrace it.
Thank you. I actually have a question about the stats with this. So it looks like our younger drivers have decreased by about 10%
Yes.
over a couple of decades. Is that what we're seeing nationally, or is that unique to Michigan?
I don't have the exact details on that, but I would certainly, I do think it is a national phenomenon.
Interesting.
That's my understanding in talking with some of the folks on our team, but I don't know that 100%.
Okay.
I know that the graduated driver's licensing structure is not unique to Michigan. Actually, federally, this was something that was done in the late 90s to ensure that we had safer students on the roads. But the graduated driver's licensing structure is expensive because it requires more training. And, for those who were, in the previous iteration, especially Michigan from 1955 to 1996, when you were doing driver's ed at your school district, it was not as strenuous as the GDL process we have now. So it's just, we're asking more out of students to get them more prepared, which is a good thing. But we're also needing a bigger structure to get that done. And so that costs more. And not every state has been able to keep up with the changes, especially us, which is why we're making this proposal.
Do you know what our kind of Midwest partner states are doing?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we'll certainly get back with you.
Okay, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Rep. Bullen?
Thank you. Along this, I've been reading recent reports, and I think it may have been some reference to it in the Population Commission report, but that fewer and fewer young people really want cars or want to drive. And there's push for more mass transportation. Do we see, I mean, I think our population's going down. We have fewer kids wanting to drive. I know my kids started to drive later because just scheduling wise. But do we really, I mean, is this something we're trying to recruit drivers? Are the kids really interested in learning to drive?
So I haven't seen any data on it per se directly, but I can talk from my own experience. I could not wait to get my driver's license. I was out on the road and just wanted it. My sister, however, took a little bit of time for her to get her license, and my brother also took him a little bit of time. But I will say that from my experience, and I think from talking with our team, once teens have that access to a driver's license, they embrace it. And so if there is if there's a sense that some teens aren't interested in driving, is because they don't have access. That would be our position. So we want to take care of the access part, and then I think we can more fairly look at whether teens actually want to drive, because right now they just don't have the appropriate access across the board.
Rep, I can tell you, our kids at 14 years and 8 months were ready to take segment 1. They were ready. Any other questions, folks? Thank you both so much. We really appreciate you being here. Please say hi to the secretary for us, but we're grateful that both of you are here. Colleagues, next week we have our last budget presentation. We've made it through almost all of them. So next week we will have civil rights and DTMB. So again, any questions that you have, please get those to us. We'll again get the answers out to everybody. But otherwise, I'm grateful for all of you being here. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody.